Hi, everyone. Welcome to Learn and Try, an interactive session on gender transformative design for women. I am Mary Katica from IDEO.org. I'm joined by Emily Boost and Rebecca Calder from Core Global, and we're really excited to have you join us today. Today is really about learning some new tools and approaches to be more gender intentional in your own practice. And hopefully today you'll be able to learn something new that you can incorporate into your own practice and bring back to your organization. What we're sharing today is based on a few different learnings that we've collaborated in the past, that our two organizations have collaborated on in the past few years. So we're going to tell you a little bit about ourselves before getting started. So my colleagues from Core Global, Rebecca and Emily here, and then you'll meet Catherine as well in our breakout sessions. They're part of an organization that's really a women-owned and led consulting firm that specializes in gender and social inclusion work. And they've done a lot of work in the past in digital financial inclusion. And we've been able to collaborate for the past few years with them, as I'm from IDEO.org, which is a nonprofit design studio. And in the past few years, we've been doing a lot of work around women's financial inclusion. And we're excited to share some of our lessons that we've learned thus far. So the way we've been collaborating over the past few years is on a program called the Women and Money Program. It's a program that's funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And it's the idea with this program is really to increase women's access to digital financial services. And because cash in and cash out networks are so critical to build thriving DFS ecosystems, we focused primarily on the barriers and opportunities to build more inclusive cash in and cash out networks. Over the past 3 years, we worked in 7 countries with 24 partners ranging from international NGOs to telcos and fintechs, and then of course, lots of technical expertise as well. We've created 9 research reports going deep into what are some of those insights, opportunities, and barriers around women's access to digital financial services, and also what are some of those larger global opportunities around increasing women's access to digital financial services. And the thing that's been so inspiring to me as a designer is that I've been able to, actually really learn so much in this journey because we've had an interdisciplinary approach. We've been inspired by gender, behavioral science, data science, and that includes my colleagues here from Core Global. And for me, this has been like, it sounds like a little over the top to say a transformational journey, but I really think it has been, in that I started this work with Women and Money 3 years ago, leading this program. I was really relatively new to gender. I'd worked in health and reproductive health for many years, and there's a lot of gender intertwined, especially with reproductive health, where gender is often a focus when we're thinking about services, policies, outcomes. But I had really never spent time with gender consultants or experts, or really understood the basics of gender until starting this journey with Core Global. And alongside Core Global, what's been so cool is I've been able to grow in my own practice, and we're hoping we can share some of those tools and approaches today with you. But we've also been able to grow as an organization at IDEO.org and being much more sophisticated in our understanding of gender. And what our journey has looked like is we really started with being more intentional about gender and design research or qualitative research. We've been able to put much more emphasis on thinking about men and boys and the influence they're having on a woman's life. And we've really changed our practices and how we ideate and think about gender with our within our ideation and prototyping process, and that helps us build more gender transformative solutions. And kind of as a result of this journey we've taken together, our two organizations, we actually created a gender and design toolkit that has helped our organization really grow across all the different processes in our organization. And that has helped us really spread more gender intentional practices across our organization, from how we set up research to how we scope projects and how we ultimately design solutions that impact the lives of women. And don't worry, that toolkit is public, and that's part of what we're going to share today. And so hopefully you'll be able to start this journey with us today by accessing some of these tools and learning some of these techniques from my wonderful colleagues. So with that, I will hand it over to Rebecca, who will share a little bit more about applying a gender and inclusion lens.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Mary. So we're going to go a little bit deeper now. And I think, Mary, you're just going to probably flick through the slides for me. Is that right? Great. So now we'll go to the next slide. And I'll just explain that for us, gender transformative solutions, what we have at the center is that those are solutions that actually start trying to dismantle the power dynamics and structures that reinforce gender and other inequalities that female identifying or female presenting people face. So that's why gender equality, to be transformational, is not just about girls and women's empowerment, it's also about social inclusion. Because for solutions to be gender transformative, we also need to recognize and design for a whole range of intersecting characteristics and the multiple ways in which people can be discriminated against and disadvantaged. So things like age and ethnicity and religion and language and sexual identity. So that's where gender inclusion, gender equality and social inclusion come together, is in a recognition of that intersection and those intersecting identities. And that is needed for a gender transformative approach. Alrighty, so on this slide, we're presenting a framework here around sort of gender that looks at 3 domains of change. I know there are lots of different frameworks out there to think about gender transformative solutions that address both gender inequality and social exclusion that people face. Your own organization or practice might have your own conceptual framework around gender, and that's great. This is just the one that we like to use and the one that we're going to use today when we go into our breakout rooms. And what it does is it describes 3 domains of change that are related to voice and agency. So you see down at the bottom, building women's and girls' individual collective voice and agency. It talks about assets, services, and opportunities, and making sure that people have access to these assets, services, and opportunities, and control over assets, decision-making. And then it talks about the enabling environment. And we think about the enabling environment as being composed of 2 things, both the sort of formal rules of the game, so things around policies and regulations, and the informal rules of the game, which are often hidden. And you may be familiar with talking about gender norms or social norms. And those are really where those informal rules come into play. They may be informal, but they're extremely powerful because they even permeate formal institutions. So you often see that there might be a rule that is sort of quite gender equitable, but people don't follow that rule because of norms. So I hope that's not too technical or complex. Some of you are going to be really familiar with this. For others, it might be a little bit of a mind bender. But if you just think about those 3 simple domains and just take a minute to think about, in your own work, in your own programming, in your own business, in your own practice or organization, which of these domains of change have you worked on? Have you worked to increase women's voice and agency? Have you worked on access to assets, services, and opportunities? Or have you worked around some of these rules, formal and informal? So I think we're going to go to a poll now. to answer that question. I'd love to know where your organization or your practice or your program has focused. And hopefully somebody can help me drop that poll into the chat. Awesome. I think Alex did that. You don't see Alex, but she's in the background supporting. And we're just waiting on the results now. Okay, so I think what the poll results are showing is that a lot of people, unsurprisingly, have focused on increasing women's and girls' access to assets, services, and opportunities. I think we've got about 80% there. That is definitely the area that most development organizations work on, and also most private sector organizations when they're working in this space. So that's not a surprise. And then we've got about 20% on transforming the enabling environment. That's really cool as well. And we've got a handful of people who are new to designing for women and girls. Yay, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Great. So really, if you want transformation, if you want really transformative gender solutions, you need to either be working in all of these spaces, or you at least need to be aware. You may be focused on increasing access to assets and services, but you also need to be aware that change needs to happen in other domains as well for it to be gender transformative. Maybe you can work in a partnership, or maybe you can think to yourself, okay, we've got a product, or we've got a service, or we've got a program that focuses on this. Is there anything else that we can build in that might deal with some of the constraints around voice and agency, or some of the constraints around the rules of the game? So that's just something to keep in mind. Even if you can't work thoroughly in all three domains, you need to be aware of them. Fantastic. So we'll go on to the next slide. Thanks so much, Mary. We're going to talk about two different tools or approaches that we've been using together, IDEO.org and Core Global, in our work over the last couple of years. The first is a gender situational analysis. And this is a tool which uses the conceptual framework that I just presented on the previous slide to explore the gender and social inclusion issues in the context that you're going to be working in. Through the use of secondary data, and sometimes also it can inform formative research where you're doing primary data collection to fill any gaps that you might have in your secondary data. And you need this really for the design, for whatever you're designing, whether it's a concept or an intervention or a project or a program. And then once you have the basic design of that, the second tool, which is the Gender Continuum, can be used to help you further develop, refine, and select concepts and prototypes so that you're actually, making them more gender transformational. And Emily will be talking about that tool in more detail a little bit later on in the presentation. Okay, so fantastic. So bringing a gender lens does help to widen your aperture and make you more aware. For example, if you're just working on access to assets, services, and opportunities, using a conceptual framework that makes you think a little bit more about voice and agency and about those formal and informal rules is really helpful. Because customers or users or clients or beneficiaries or consumers, whatever lexicon jargon that you use to describe the people that you're trying to benefit, they're not just people, they're gendered beings. And that gender identity that they have really drives, in so many ways, people's ability to exercise their voice and agency, to access these opportunities, assets, and services, and then to navigate within the formal and informal rules in a way that results in greater empowerment and better outcomes for them. So now if you think about, we've got this gender and inclusion lens. What we also sort of have layered on this in our work is a life stages approach. So this adds even more depth to the picture because it recognizes that girls and women in different life stages have different experiences, they have different opportunities, and they have different challenges and constraints. Apologies for the small dog barking in the background. That would be mine. The exercise in voice and agency is just, sorry, 1 second. Who knows if that will work? It usually doesn't, but we might get a brief reprieve. So yeah, if you think about, women across the whole life stage don't have the same ability to exercise voice, for example. Like you wouldn't expect a 13 or a 14-year-old girl to be exercising her voice and agency in the same way that a 30-year-old woman would. People in different life stages, women and girls in different life stages, need different opportunities. They need different services. They need different assets. And the rules change as well. In some cultures, the rules change quite dramatically when a woman marries and she moves from her natal home to her marital home, or the rules might change if she has a child, for example, in terms of what she is able to be and what she is able to do. So I think that it's interesting to think about how these domains play out across the different life stages. And that can be part of your situational analysis. And it really also needs to be part of the way that you think about your programming and your across the gender continuum. So fantastic. I am handing over to Emily, I think.
To me.
Mary.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. So as Rebecca started to introduce, as part of the Women in Money program, we started to explore this concept called life stages. When we were doing our research, these across 7 different contexts, these themes around key moments continued to emerge. And it really piqued the interest of the Gates Foundation, and we were able to further explore it this past year in collaboration with Core Global, with Driven Data, and with a lot of different experts and organizations. So at the simplest, I would say that, life stages is really like a new intersectional engagement strategy that meets women in their most critical moments with solutions that can really build her power. And what we saw in our research is there are these moments in a woman's lives where gender norms are in flux, where and they have the potential to even relax, or they have the potential to contract and further limit a woman's power or agency or voice. And so what we're trying to do with this strategy and approach is to really take these moments and meet her with solutions that will help propel her forward and help her in her journey. So these are these critical kind of inflection points. And to really meet her in these moments effectively, yes, we're at a financial inclusion conference, but we need to think more holistically than just her economic needs. We need to think about her health needs, her education needs, to really support her in these key life stage transitions. And so what we did with this work is we identified 5 pivotal moments. And I have to say, there are so many inflection points across women and girls. But we narrowed it down to these 5 because these are the 5 that we saw across evidence review, that we saw across data analysis of the FI data set, that we saw across qualitative research, and that we also heard from over 100 individual experts representing 60 organizations, that these are the moments that seem to be most pivotal in really determining the path of a woman's economic empowerment. And so so for these 5 moments, I have to say that they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. A woman could be getting married, becoming a mother in the same, or a girl in the same few months, but maybe one of those is a larger driver and the needs are slightly different for these different moments. And so don't think of them as completely mutually exclusive, but think of them as really critical transitions that we have an opportunity to design for and build better products and services for women and girls during these moments. Today in our breakout sessions, which we'll get to shortly, I promise, this is a workshop, is we're going to be focusing on finishing school, becoming a mother, and entering the workforce. So finishing school is so pivotal. It's critical because there's significant evidence that a girl's ability to finish school impacts her future ability to earn an income, her future agency, but also has a significant impact on the well-being of her future family. And Emily and Rebecca can list off all of the reasons why this moment is so important. And if you're in that breakout group, you'll have the pleasure of working with Emily on that one. Becoming a mother is also a really critical transition in a young woman's life. This is super contextual in nature because in some contexts, becoming a mother might actually increase or change. Becoming a mother always changes someone's social status, but becoming a mother might increase their social status. Other times it might decrease their social status within their communities, for better or for worse. And what happens with becoming a mother is there's obviously new economic pressures, but there's also this negative correlation, which so many of us understand, between women's unpaid care work and their workforce participation. And so how can we think about, really supporting women in moments of transitions, of becoming a mother, and helping them either with policies around paid care work or with helping them transition to earning an income in a way that they can still provide for their family and provide for their children. And the final one that we're going to focus on today is entering the workforce. And for the sake of this exercise and for Lifestages, we've focused entering the workforce on a younger generation of women, because what we saw in our research is that women aged 20 to 24 actually had the lowest workforce participation across the three geographies where we focused Lifestages on. And those were Nigeria, India, and Kenya. And, that's something very telling. And I think that's why all of these Lifestages are so intersectional, because what's happening at that time is women are becoming a mother. That's the getting married. But it is assumed that those are the predominant moments. And then later on in a woman's life, she can build the skills or confidence to move into entering the workforce, or those opportunities arise rather. But what if we were able to build paths for young women to confidently earn earlier in their life so that they have those skills to go back to as they're transitioning across these different life stages? So this is an incredibly short intro to Lifestages. I'll just tell you one more thing, and then we're going to transition to breakout groups. For us, Lifestages is a much more holistic approach to designing for women and girls. We're looking at this approach through the lens of really driving women's economic empowerment and digital financial inclusion. We do believe that Lifestages, there's significant impact on so many of the we drivers that we all care so deeply about building women's agency, around increasing her ability to earn an income, around building a better enabling environment around her. And there are also opportunities to increase digital financial inclusion, increasing her ability to earn and use digital financial services, and actually dig into meaningful use of digital financial services. But that being said, Lifestages can also apply to so many different sectors. I think there's some chat questions about this, and how could we actually apply Lifestages framework to other sectors as well, but always with this really intersectional lens of thinking about supporting women in these moments of need with all of the right tools, whether it be reproductive health tools, financial tools, training, whatever it might be, to really accelerate them forward in these moments. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Emily, who is going to finally introduce the workshop activity.
Great, thanks, Mary. So if you go on to the next slide, and then Next slide again. So as Mary said, we're going to practice using the Continuum for Gender Transformational Design, which we'll share the link to our gender toolkit at the end of this session, so you can access all of the tools and information on that. And we're going to be looking at specific life stages. So the three we'll look at are around finishing school, becoming a mother, and entering the workforce. But before we go into that, I just want to introduce the tool in a little bit more detail so that we're all really familiar with the approach that we're going to use in the workshop. So if you go on to the next slide, so this is the Continuum for Gender Transformational Design, Gender Transformative Design. And this sort of gender continuum is sometimes also called a gender marker or a gender scale, but it's a tool that's used by many donors and practitioners to assess the gender intentionality and potential of different concepts or projects or programs. So you may have heard of this before. Sometimes there are 3 points on the scale, sometimes there are 5. We use this one, this 4-point scale for the IDEO.org Women in Money project. And this really helped us to assess concepts and prototypes with sort of working with an interdisciplinary team to help us think through together how we can design more gender transformative solutions. So I'll briefly describe each of these 4 stages before we go into the breakouts. So when we talk about gender negative, what this means is that your project or service has potential to actually reinforce or even exacerbate gender inequalities, even if this is unintentional. I think that's the key point. Because if you're unaware of the different needs and experiences of men and women, you may be reinforcing gender roles and stereotypes without meaning to. So as an example of this, in the Women in Money project, we were designing around the life stage of entering marriage. And we looked at the concept of a wedding savings account in India, which seemed like a sort of a novel idea at first glance. But we didn't develop this further because we found that it had potential to support dowry culture and therefore reinforce women's worth as a marriageable asset. So that's just one example. If we look at gender neutral, what this means is that by not recognizing women and men as distinct user groups with potentially different needs, that you are likely to be maintaining the status quo or potentially reinforcing, as we talked about in gender negative. So for example, if you look at the concept of mobile money transfers, the discrete nature of these has potential to conceal financial transactions. And while this may seem empowering for women at first glance, some research in Kenya has found that without more intentional design, this can actually challenge norms around financial decision-making in the home, which is linked to concepts of masculinity. And this can, in some cases, result in household tensions or even violence. So more work would be needed to really move this up the scale to be more of a gender-sensitive or transformative solution. Then the third one on the scale, if we look at gender-sensitive, which is sort of getting more towards where we want to be at the end of the scale. This means that you are recognizing and addressing the different needs of women and men, and you seek to improve the conditions or outcomes for women and girls specifically. So you have a specific intention there. So for example, if we think about innovative credit technologies such as psychometric tests, which many lenders are starting to introduce to predict the ability of a borrower to repay a loan, and which would reduce the need for collateral, is a potentially gender-sensitive solution because collateral is often an asset that women struggle with. And then finally, gender transformative is the ultimate ambition on this scale. And it's when you're really starting to seek to address unequal power relations between women and men by providing women with more control over resources, supporting to increase their decision-making in the home or the community, and ultimately you're working towards a women's empowerment agenda. So for example, if we think about a mobile wallet, which can help women budget their finances, and potentially have sub-wallets earmarked for different uses to help with sort of different savings and spending. This kind of activity could be accompanied by another activity that includes a dialogue between women and men, for example, around household resource management, the role of women in the paid economy. And these kinds of conversations can help to mitigate the risks that we mentioned earlier around potential household tensions or even backlash. So ultimately, it can create an opportunity for a more equal distribution of roles and responsibilities around financial management. So hopefully that gives you a flavor of what's in a gender continuum, if this is new to you, and how it can be used and how we've used it for a financial inclusion project. But just as sort of a reminder, sort of where possible, we want to avoid solutions that could be potentially seen as gender negative or even gender neutral. And gender sensitive often is sort of more achievable for reasons of scope, time, and capacity of partners that are implementing these solutions. And I guess just a final note is that while gender sensitive strategies don't necessarily attempt to address the gender norms and sort of the power imbalances and so on, sort of to be more transformative, over time, sometimes these solutions can start to influence social dynamics and thus gently sort of nudge gender norms in a more positive direction. So in a way, they could lead to more transformative change given time and the right conditions. So that's the snapshot overview. We will go into this. This is the tool we're going to use in the breakouts. But before we move to the breakouts, I just want to check with Mary and Rebecca if there's anything in the chat function that we'd like to address now.
Nothing that I think we need to address now. Some good comments are coming through. People are making really good points. So thank you, and keep using that chat.
Okay, perfect. So if we go on to the next slide then, for the breakouts, we're going to utilize Mural, which is an online collaborative workshop platform. And we'll be dropping the link to this in the chat function now. So you should be able to go in. So this is a collaborative online space. You should be able to add notes in the post-its, but if you have any issues, you can also just add your thoughts to the chat function and we'll make sure we're capturing that. And if you are joining by phone, please feel free to unmute yourself to speak so that you're able to contribute as well. We really want to make sure that you're able to sort of build on the ideas and share examples of your current work as well. And just one last slide then. So when you do go into the Mural link, you should be able to enter as a visitor. If you have any problems, let us know in the chat and we can help you out. And once you get into the Mural, have a look around until we get started and we'll join you there. So to get into the breakout rooms, if you scroll down to the bottom of the page that you're on, you should see 3 different breakout rooms. Breakout room 1 is around finishing school. Breakout room 2 is around becoming a mother, and breakout room 3 is around the life stage of entering the workforce. So please feel free to just click on the one that is most of interest to you, and we'll meet you in there.
And that's just confirming, Emery, that that's the swap card page. So on the swap card page, if you scroll on down, you'll see those 3 breakout rooms.
Yeah. Great, we'll meet you there. Great. So I think we're all back in the main room now. We've just got a few slides to show. Mary, are you able to share the last few slides so we can do a quick wrap up? Great, and on to the next one. Yeah, so there's sort of 3 different things that we talked about today, and it was a real sort of whistle-stop tour. But just to kind of recap on the different tools that we've been looking at and then where to go for more information. So the gendered situational analysis, where we talked about the conceptual framework, is really to help you understand gender roles, norms, barriers, and opportunities within context. And it's a tool to help inform your research and your design stage, and to continue updating throughout your project cycle. It's not something that should ever sit on a shelf. It's something that you can continue to update as you learn through your programming. The Lifestages lens is something that can really be applied from the start of any program. It helps bring a more holistic understanding to women's lives and the key moments that you can design for. And hopefully you got a little bit of a flavor of that today. And then finally, the Continuum for Gender Transformative Design is a tool that you can use to help assess your concepts for impact on gender equality. Also, we talked about in the breakout room, it helps you uncover potential risks and think about how you can really adapt your concepts for more gender transformative results. And as Rebecca said in the breakout room, this is, we would normally spend quite a lot of time, days even, unpacking going back to the gender situational analysis, rethinking, looking at our formative research, and trying to really understand how to improve concepts. So hopefully using that tool gives you a flavor of what that process might look like. So if we go on just to the next slide, please, Mary. We've got some links here on where you can go for more, as this was just a taster. So you can download the Gender and Design Toolkit. You can download the Lifestages report, which is the full research report of the multi-country research that IDEO undertook and we were supporting on as part of this Gates-funded Women in Money program. And with those, you can, have a conversation with your team. It might be that, once you go into the Gender and Design Toolkit, you think, oh, I'd really like to use this gendered situational analysis for your project. So you can bring people together to have a look at that. Or it might be that you want to think about, using the Gender Continuum. If it's not a tool that you've used previously before, you can bring some of your team together and think about how to start implementing. But hopefully you're able to access those links. I don't know if we want to put those in the chat function so that people are able to go directly to them. Great, thank you. And then, just final thing, we're just a few minutes over time, so we will do a quick wrap up to be mindful and respectful of your time. So just a huge thank you for your participation in today's session. We do have our contact details on the next slide. Mary, if you want to go just to the last one. So please do reach out. We'd love to connect with you and keep in touch. I think that's all from us today. So thanks very much, everyone.